Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to introduce Bogdan Manolea to you today. Bogdan is an old colleague and friend of mine. We have been working together in several EU projects for many years now. I think it's more than 10 years. Bogdan is the executive director of the Digital Rights Association for Technology and Internet, APTI, in Romania. He has a legal background and a vast experience in law and ICT. He's inter alia author of various presentations and articles on subjects related to ICT law and digital rights in national and international conferences. And as I said at the beginning, he has been very active in European research projects dealing with issues of digitalization, internet, and law. Bogdan, it's a pleasure to have you here. How are you? How is the situation in Romania at the moment?
Thank you for having me at Ars Boni. By the way, this is a very European name for such a...
Indeed, yeah. And a very, Latin, old, historic Roman law name, right? I'm sorry for this, yeah.
Anyone in the legal field understands. So I'm quite well, on these circumstances, of course, meaning that I'm healthy and the family is healthy, and that is important. And being involved in the field with law and digital issues, we are, of course, busy and very busy, depending on which side of the topic you're working on. Because basically, because of COVID-19, we're seeing an increased digitization activities in both public and private sectors. Mm-hmm. So even though now from a public health point of view, where what people are saying that it's a second wave, much bigger than the first one of infections, and most of them are in Bucharest. I'm still based in Bucharest. But on the other hand, we see that people are trying to realize the importance of digital, and they are trying to catch up on something that they haven't been doing in years, both in public and private sector, with some differences between the two. But generally, there are a lot of things happening, and a lot of things that didn't happen in the past years are starting to happen now. In various fields, from starting with e-signature on one side, or ending with security of personal data on the others. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily they are all going in the right path, but that's another discussion that I'm happy to have.
Mm-hmm. Because what is not going into the right path, and for what reasons?
Because being such a rush in trying to get these projects up and running as quickly as possible, either because the customers are complaining, or you need to sell your items online because offline is not possible anymore, or you're part of a public administration, and your entire process was offline, so now you face pressure from the public on this. But on all of this, you need to act fast. And fast meaning you need to have an app or an online service that is up and running, and the only thing you care is if it's running. You don't care about the rest. You don't care about the legality of the service. You don't care too much about how the personal data is being protected in this process. You don't care at this point too much, or you understand too much about the security of personal data or other security of the processes. I feel that these critical questions that are related to any kind of online services are being left behind. Just because you need to do something and you need to do it very fast.
Yeah, and the things that you need to do that you mentioned are electronic signatures in particular, and probably tracing apps, and what else?
Yeah, on the electronic signature, we are on the good side of the story from my perspective, because for a number of years in Romania, it was perpetuating a false idea that only qualified electronic signatures are valid, are legally valid, which is of course wrong and in contradiction with the eIDAS regulation. But now the government also has realized that there are all types of signatures, and people are communicating with public authorities via email, for example, or through some kind of online forms and in much simpler method. So they issued an emergency ordinance earlier in the year, basically saying that each public authority needs to assess their own type of electronic signature that it would be needed. So instead of just having a relatively small pool of people having qualified electronic signature, now basically the market is open also for the other type of electronic signatures in relation with the state authorities, which was...
Sorry, and did that have any impact on I mean, are there any cases of breach or misuse or any other issues?
Not so far from this perspective. But that's also because a lot of the public authorities that are gathering a lot of personal data through electronic means are on the cautious side. So even though they had the option to choose, a lot of them choose to still ask for qualified electronic signature, especially when a lot of personal data or sensitive personal data is being transferred. However, that eased a bit the public administration, especially at a local level, in simplify their processes with the public. You know, receiving a request or a petition or whatever. So that simplified a lot. Even having a lawsuit at the court and just being able to send the documents via email and then backing them up with a postal delivery or in person if need be. Yeah, so this is on the positive side, the part with the electronic signature.
And this is still in force, although the absolute emergency situation is over. And is there a defined end of this, or is it continued?
No. This will be a continuous situation.
Okay. And that's interesting because that's not the case in many other countries, right?
Yeah, and the good side is that it had helped a lot of the public administration to transform their processes. The part that I'm usually criticizing is that there should have been more guidance from the central public authority on this. Now it's called the ADR, the Authority for Digitalization of Romania, to explain exactly in what type of processes do you need to use, for example, qualified electronic signature, in what other types is more relevant to use advanced, and in what other situations a basic, simple electronic signature is good enough. So this hasn't popped up to the surface. So.
Which is the case for the last 20 years now, right? So I mean,
well, yes, but on the other hand, we see in other European countries good example in this situation. We've popped up on good recommendation from the Dutch government that said, you know, look, this is an example that you might want to use, or UK or others. And it's clearly needed for the public administration to step up and to be at the same pace that with the other private electronic services, because otherwise people would see it as old, which it is anyway, and it sometimes it also leads to corruption and other problems. Yeah. So on the electronic signature, I think we see more benefits at this moment in time. On the security and the personal data processing, I think we see more problems on the horizon, or at least I see more problems on the horizon, also being in the field for too many years. Also on personal data, talking about good things and bad things. The good thing is that we don't have an app for COVID, I don't know, testing or contacts. There have been very light discussions on the subject, but because I think the public authorities were not prepared to create such an app, and because in other countries more advanced, it created a lot of pros and cons. I think the decision at least from the Ministry of Health was not to push too much for such an app. And in the condition when we see other countries in Europe, especially DPAs, considering that these apps are not useful at all and that they may misuse personal data, or they can collect too much personal data without a proper legal basis. I think at this moment it's a right decision. On the negative side is the fact that a lot of this digitization of processes from the public administration and the private sector are collecting more data than necessary, and without a proper GDPR implementation in place. So without assessing what would be the correct legal basis, what data do you need for the purpose, what are actually your purposes in place, and so on and so forth. And just to give you a concrete example, there's been this project launched by the Ministry of Health together with an NGO. It was unclear who was running the website, if that was the NGO or the Ministry of Health. And the online service was called something like the medical log. And you could create an account and to declare if how do you feel today, what is your temperature, have you been in contact with other COVID-19 registered cases. But you could also say that about your neighbors and about other persons in your family, so not just yourself. And we thought this was very, very weird in the way it was developed. It was also unclear who had access to this data, in what format. Would they have direct access to the names that you put there, or you would just use statistical data for other purposes. So all these kind of issues, you just create more questions than answers. And the result, I think that not a lot of people are using that website, at least. And we also, on top of that, we made a complaint to the Romanian Data Protection Authority on how this particular project was implemented.
So you, meaning your organization in this case, right?
Yeah, the organization, APTI, the organization that I represent, together with other civil society organizations.
Okay, and what was the outcome of this so far? I mean, is there any...
We didn't receive any answer so far from the Data Protection Authority.
And if there is such a case in Romania happening, is there some media coverage about this? And how do people react on this? Or is it just under the...
On this subject, not that much. There were the media coverage was particularly interested in the COVID type of application that were discussed mostly during the lockdown, so in March, April, or other types of application that would gather mass data. And there were, let's say, two categories. One, it was to use the data from the electronic communication operators in order to provide statistical data on the movement of the population, which could be a good idea if that would be very clearly explained to the population, in my opinion. However, here, I think we had a lack of communication, especially from the telecom operators. So it wasn't any public announcement that this is being done in Romania. We know that it is an agreement at the European level. But if you are a subscriber of one of these mobile operator, you would just receive at home a notice later based on Article 13 of GDPR that now this data is being collected for these purposes, and you have the possibility to opt out. So they based this processing on legitimate interest. But more than this, it wasn't very well explained how this data is being used, and this is only statistical data that is being shared with some parts of the government. So this is one item that raised some questions from the media, and the other one was a tentative to do an app for the people that are quarantined or self-quarantine, actually the self-quarantine. And the idea was, and this was a hot topic in March, where a lot of Romanians living abroad decided to come back home. So you had tens of thousands of people coming back from regions where there were higher incident of COVID-19 than in Romania. And they were obliged to self-quarantine in various locations around the country, in the rural side, in the urban areas, and no one could check on them. So at that moment, the government came up with the idea to do an app that they must, apparently, download on their smartphone. And that would have been used to check up on them or even to see if they are still in the location that they declared. And of course, this also raised a lot of privacy issues, data protection. But
like in Poland, right? So this is quite similar to the app that was developed in Poland.
It was related to the Polish one, but in the end, the app was never created. So, because the number of self-isolation cases was lower, actually there were more people now leaving Romania to go to work abroad again because of the money is over, so they need to work again. So yeah. So at this point we don't have any COVID-19 related apps.
Which means that at the moment, I mean, there is this one case pending that you mentioned before about this website, but apart from this, everything is more or less as nearly as normal, or it's the new normal, or
well, it's the new normal until something bad is happening, because I think a lot of these activities of forced digitization inherit a lot of problems on personal data and data security that would only be seen in the future. I think it's impossible at this moment in time to assess all the new projects and to realize what are their impact. And the good part is that we, not having this kind of personal data on a mass scale that would target the entire population, I think that the risk is smaller for smaller databases or smaller projects on a county level or in other parts. But I think that the questions on personal data and security will pop up in the future as well, especially on things that have been developed during this period. Because
And do you have the feeling, because this is how I understood you at the beginning, that it's more or less you and your organization and some other geeks, I would call them, being concerned about this, but not the general population?
That is true. That is true. And the security experts are also concerned about this. But the only thing we can do at this moment is just raise awareness and just tell people to be very careful on how they give their personal data, in what circumstances, and who is using them, and so on and so forth. But you can't do too much at this moment. On the other hand, we see that people need to communicate with public authorities or with the private sector, so they need to send their data. And if the only way they can do it is via email, then what would you tell them? Don't send your ID card via email. They will do it anyway. So it's quite complicated at this moment in time to give a general recommendation that could also work in the current situation.
Yeah, which is probably true for most of the countries. I had the privilege to have a little look into that. Of all the solutions are, of course, not really bulletproof when it comes to security and privacy. And there's a lot of developments ongoing on this at the moment everywhere, and nobody really takes the time to reflect on what that might have as an impact. Let me perhaps ask a more general question, which is about apart from the digitization part of the problem, there are quite some very tangible limitations of fundamental rights discussed everywhere. It starts with the right to come together in public spaces. It's about whether or not you are allowed to follow religious services, whether or not you are allowed to go to the theater, and all this. So how is it when it comes to these things in Romania at the moment? And are there any cases that you want to report about this?
There are several cases that we can talk about. Let me just give you a general introduction. I think we've been following this subject together with other civil rights NGOs. We have a Romanian website called, in Romanian is stareademocrației.ro, which means the situation of the democracy.ro, where we use just to report cases that we feel that they are breaching human rights. So it's more of a log of things that we see, and on some of them we may complain, on some of them we just take note of them, and maybe after the situation is over we can take a solution or I know a step forward. And in this, together with the other NGOs, we are happy because we have NGOs from different fields. So we are NGOs active in the social assistance, for example, and others that are more into protecting minorities or discrimination. And on top of this, there is quite a good report that the Fundamental Rights Agency has been published in the past month, that is trying to go on each country and with the help of local experts to pinpoint on the more important cases that have happened. I don't know if they stopped or they are still doing it. They did it when it was a full lockdown, but I think it's a good resource for all countries. So yes, we had a lot of complaints and question raised about the legality of various limitations of fundamental rights. Some of them ended up in the Constitutional Court. Some of them not yet. Some of them were contested in the regular courts, so the trials are still pending. The case that ended up in front of the Constitutional Court, and actually this was one case where it was very politicized. So if you look on the Romanian media, you might not understand exactly what was the topic at the core of the discussion. But basically, the people ombudsman, which is called in Romania Avocatul Poporului, has challenged the constitutional of several measures during the state of the emergency, because they were taken by not by law but by other secondary level of normative acts, so orders of the Ministry of Interior, order of the Ministry of Health. And basically they considered, so the Constitutional Court considered in the end that this was unconstitutional, because they didn't follow the good legal basis, the proper legal basis, and the measures were too vague. So in the law they were too vague, and then in the secondary legislation they were detailed. And these were also the measures relating to quarantine and self-quarantine. And of course, the government reacted very politically, saying that in Romania you cannot send people to quarantine, which was not true. And they were forced to pass a law via an emergency procedure in the parliament, so having all the parties involved. And that was good, because some things that were already unclear were more clear after the law. For example, before the law was passed, people were sent to a self-quarantine mode just verbally. So you ended up, for example, when you entered the country and you said, you need to self-quarantine for 14 days. That's it. Now, at least there is a procedure in place that makes the authority issue a paper with your name on it. So, it's addressed to you. And you also have a legal redress in place. So you have an appeal procedure in front of a judge, court, and you have your rights respected. So this is the part that has been more or less clarified in these months, with a lot of political ramblings, of course. The parts that are still unclear are the ones on what are the bases of certain decisions that the government takes, especially in the examples that you gave on gathering or of more people together, for various examples. For example, the government decided, I think about 2 weeks ago, that they would open church services. So they allowed the church services to continue. However, they decided that you could not go to theater, which has changed on 1st of September. Or 1 month ago, the gambling facilities, the offline gambling facilities were open. So somehow this became a very important issue. But you could not go in a restaurant, even though there were only 2 tables. So these kind of decisions not properly explained and which seem very subjective were always subject to questioning from various people. I mean, some of them members of the religious communities, some of them just interested in fundamental rights. And also with the associations that I told you about, we made, I think, a couple of public statements regarding the right to assembly, especially because nothing has been in the law or in other decisions on the right to assembly. So even though for now it's clear that you can have a meeting with, I think it's 50 people inside and I think 200 outside, there is still nothing being said on the right of assembly. How, if you want to do a protest today or tomorrow, how would you organize that? Can you organize it just keeping 2 meters apart or not? So these kind of questions are still up in the open.
Which means that there are no protests happening at the moment, different from, for example, Germany or Austria, or does it mean that nobody cares about their legal basis?
The fact that the government doesn't allow protests doesn't mean that they don't happen. However, they did happen on a lower scale than what I saw in Germany or in other places. Even though the topics are the same topics are still in the public eye. So the public health, why do we need to respect these measures? Aren't these limitations of our fundamental rights taking too long? Are they substantiated? Is it a fake news? Does COVID really exist? How does connect with the 5G if you want to go into the full paranoia mode? So yeah, there are people that are protesting against those things.
But is there a legal debate about this ongoing? I mean, whether there are any limitations of the right to express your opinion or the access to information and so on?
There were a few during the emergency situation. That also related with one of the topics that we're following quite closely on internet blocking. But besides on these cases that I'm happy to elaborate on if you want me to, generally the government and the public is much more open in accepting all kinds of opinions and letting people express freely on the social networks or in offline if they want to. Because we had some limitations in the past, even in the recent past, that were very badly reflected. So I think right now the government just doesn't want to be involved too much in encroaching the freedom of assembly or the freedom of expression for these reasons.
But when it comes to the internet blocking cases, you're referring to cases where fake news are blocked, or what are these cases about?
Exactly. This was a provision in one of these emergency ordinances saying that a special committee may decide that certain pages are fake news and they need to be blocked by the internet service providers, which faced high fines from the telecom authority. And in the end, during the whole emergency period, I think there were about 10 or 12 websites which were being blocked. But the whole discussion took place, and I think this raised more questions about the internet blocking process, because first it was made by a group of people which were not made public. There were NGOs asking who exactly is part of this committee that takes decision that this is fake news and this is not fake news. And the government said, we cannot tell you the names of those people. We cannot tell you even exactly how many they are and from what ministries. Because
why not? Because of data protection, or what was
no, not even that, because they change too often. that was
they change too often. Okay.
Yes, or they are not everyone is taking part in this decision, or other reasons. But basically we could never find out exactly who are the persons that took the decision that one side is fake news and another one is not. Then in some of the cases, the websites were hosted on free hosting servers. In another cases, even though they complain they cannot contact the owner of the website, they forgot to look in the .rohuis database where you find public information, or you forgot to look on the web page itself where it was a very visible phone number that you could call. So all these decisions trying to hastily say, this is fake news, this is being shared on Facebook. By the way, Facebook posts were not removed, or Facebook profiles were not removed because they didn't have any legal tool to do that, or good connection with Facebook, if you want. But websites, yes. So you had even the interesting situation where a website would be blocked, but its Facebook account, which was more popular than the website as such, keep continuing doing their own propaganda. By the way, most of them were blatant cases. So maybe it was even necessary to do something about it. But I think in most of the cases, blocking these this kind of websites just make them more publicly known, and they attracted more followers. Especially that when the whole emergency situation stopped. So I don't know, let's say in day 0, everything that was blocked in day 0-1 was legal in 0+1. So then you ask yourself questions, what has changed in 2 days to so much, or in 24 hours, that something shouldn't be read or shared 1 day ago and now it's fine. So yes, I think these kind of blocking cases would deserve probably a more thorough look and research by hopefully people in Romania, or some independent researchers, or law students or whatever, just to pinpoint the kind of questions and problems they have raised, because similar things might happen in the future. There might be other government authorities that would like to block things, and I think first they need to ask themselves some really delicate questions before they start going on this lane.
So to understand this behind all the diplomacy that you are using, are you arguing at the moment that these cases are some kind of example for further blocking cases that might happen, and not necessarily about fake news then?
I think that some parts of the government would see internet blocking as a solution to fake news, which is definitely not, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, but if everything that you tell me now is known by the general public, I think I can't imagine that would be very popular then. I mean, a committee that is unknown, a blockage action that is obviously useless because Facebook is not affected by this. So what for? I mean,
because it makes things harder for the person that is publishing it.
Yeah,
that's the reason, actually. And because it seems in the eye of the public that you're doing something. So I don't know, you have an article saying that COVID-19 doesn't exist, and then you just decide to block it. And then you just, well, in the end, you create more. In the eye of the public, you say, okay, I'm doing this. I'm propagating right information, and I'm closing the ones that are just saying lies. But on the other hand, you're just giving more fuel to other lunatics that really don't believe that COVID-19 is there. Because otherwise, why would you like to block them? So,
did the internet service provider agree with this, and did they comply?
Yes, most of them did comply with no questions, because there were very high fines in place by the telecom operator. So they didn't want to be part of this.
And Facebook and other social networks did not comply because...
As far as we are aware, no requests were sent to Facebook on these cases, as far as we are aware. At least not on the official channels. I mean, maybe there were like reports, like any user may report a post or another user like a fake one, but there wasn't any kind of open or hidden deal between Facebook and the government on how to stop certain information.
And that's not only for, sorry.
Yeah, maybe also because this happened too quickly. So the whole COVID-19 happened.
And it's not only true for Facebook, but also for YouTube and Twitter
and that is correct.
So the internet blocking is like in 2000.
Yes. Well, now it's not even in 2000 because now there is no emergency situation, so nothing is blocked. Well, yeah, we have just one minor law on blocking on unauthorized gambling websites. But besides that, the internet is quite free in Romania in terms of internet blocking. So nothing is blocked.
Interesting. And your organization is monitoring this and then reporting, or what?
We were monitoring this. We published in this common website that I told you about with the other NGOs. Other NGOs that are working more on the freedom of expression, they have sent the request to ask for the names of the people in this committee. Other NGOs that are part of the Reporters Without Borders organization are following these cases, but this is more now like a closed episode because things, the emergency situation does not exist, so things are not blocked anymore. So it just remains like an attempt that has failed, at least according to our understanding. But it's something that has been noted.
Which brings me perhaps back to the very beginning of this conversation about the situation, the actual situation, because you constantly argue now that the emergency situation is over and you are back into some kind of new normal now.
No, it's called the alert situation.
The alert situation, meaning, for example, that schools will be open and universities will be open just as if there were no cases, or?
No, in case of schools, for the moment, this is the hot topic. They are supposed to open on 14th of September, so in 1 week. There are 3 types of scenarios created by the Ministry of Education, and it's up to each school or each county to take a decision based on the number of cases in a respective territory. So probably most of the schools will start with a hybrid scenario, meaning that not all pupils will go to the school, so some will go, some will not go, and in other cases everyone will go, but they will be required to have masks, to sit at least 1 meter apart. If the situation, if the building or the classroom allows that kind of things. But pretty much this is the official recommendation, and in practice it's a lot of chaos because not all schools have the mandatory IT equipment to start online classes. If you have half a classroom attending online. There was also a public auction, a major public auction to acquire I think 500,000 tablets, which has gone wrong because nothing has been acquired so far. So it's a lot of uncertainty and unclarity, which would force some people just to face the new reality on a daily basis and to think how they are dealing with it. And this raises additional questions with other topics that I've raised, for example, data protection. I've been asked by other NGOs and by the media at the end of the last scholar year about a number of data protection issues involving children and schools, because people that don't know how technology is being used are either by mistake or by their own decision using it in the wrong way. For example, taking pictures with all the students in your Zoom account, or deciding to use, I don't know, Zoom or Skype or others without a proper security, not to even discuss more stringent details on how do you select your own recording tool. Then there have been cases where either teachers were recording their entire lessons and putting them online on Facebook without properly notifying the children or the parents of those children. Yeah, and all these kind of situations that just pop up because you move people from one scenario, then they feel very much in control. So the classroom and everything that is in the classroom, and you put them into a totally new electronic medium, and yeah, I know they need to, sometimes they need to brag on social networks, sometimes they need to they feel that they need to provide or to have evidence that the classes have been taking place and there are no problems. And sometimes you have the other scenario, so you have pupils recording the teachers and leaking this information on social networks or on other websites. So you have all the possible scenarios of things that may go wrong, because no one took the time when you start this whole process to tell your students what they could and they couldn't do with this kind of recording. Just to give one simple example.
And if I remember the statistics correctly that are provided by the European Commission, Romania has constantly the last position when it comes to internet usage and internet penetration rates in the European Union. So or one of the last, and perhaps sometimes not the last, but quite at the end at least.
Exactly.
So I mean, I would expect then that that a hybrid scenario, or a scenario where students are expected to use internet on a regular basis, will then cause even additional issues, because quite some of them will simply not have the technical equipment needed. And
yes, and on top of that, you have the discrepancy between the parents and the children using this equipment, because in a lot of discussion about children's safety, the parents must play an important role in teach their children on especially on key issues such as security and privacy, which are not being told by the app that you're using. And this is not happening because even if the number of the percentage of the students or of the pupils that are using IT is much higher than of the parents, then it is the children that know how to use them or not use them, but doesn't acknowledge that. So yeah, and of course, as you mentioned, there are still a lot of pupils in Romania that don't have access to a computer or to a tablet or to a smartphone, at least to use this. There have been some studies made by by several NGOs representing students and pupils in the country. And this is why the public acquisition with the tablets has been initiated, but it was initiated too late. So right now,
and it didn't work, you tell me, right?
So exactly, it's still in limbo, it's being contested. So the bottom line is that they will not have the tablets I don't know, in the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks at least.
But on the other hand, also, if it's up to every school to decide on how to proceed with this, it's absolutely impossible for the parents to make any plans, right? I mean, if you are, if both parents are working and then the school decides to do whatever next week without any information a week ahead, that very much looks like a very challenging situation.
Exactly. And then it will depend on the parents, it will depend on the family, if they have grandparents or others that can take care of the children. It will depend if the parents are in a lucky situation when they can work from home or not. If they are employed with a working contract, they have the right, according to the government, to take some free days and being paid 75% of the salaries. But if you're a freelancer or a lawyer, you don't have this luxury. So you just need to find a solution to go forward, kind of postpone meetings or do online meetings and announce that children may disturb from time to time, be aware, and that's it.
And how about the universities?
The universities are closed in this period. They are about to open on 1st of October. And it's still unclear how they will open. And of course, the university have much more autonomy than the schools, so they will need to design pretty much on their own, based on guidance from the public health departments in each county. But so far, there are more question marks than answers. I haven't followed the subject too closely, but I think most of them have just more or less digitized their enrollment process, because this is what is taking place in this period. So they accepted for all documents to be sent via electronic means, or via electronic means, then by post if they need some kind of original documents, and so on.
And would you say that the legal system as a whole changed in a way due to all this chaos that you're talking about? So is there, apart from what we talked already about, which is the electronic signatures part, so is there more of automatization taking place when it comes to, I mean, the organization of the justice system and the courts and the administration, or is this also just everyone does anything?
No, it's also the justice system. Well, the justice system is already being going through a process of digitization. I think what COVID started is a process to speed up certain processes that were already going on. For example, the access of the parties to a digital case, your case digital file, which was pretty much a rule only in, I think, one part of Romania, where a local appeal court has been more open and innovative. And now this has been expanded to other parts of the country. And the national system that is being thought by the Ministry of Justice received more importance. There were these kind of forced cases where the courts were they accepted, for example, to use video conferencing for hearing the parties, for hearing the lawyers' complaints, for talking to witnesses or others, and they were much more used than before. But I would say that still the process is very much paper-based. So it's still very much traditional way of doing doing law. So talking with friends that are judges, they all the time they say that our job is just to put the finger on the paper and to read them. I think this would take a while, being such a complicated, massive system.
So the overall picture that you're drawing looks very, to me, if I may be very open, very chaotic, I would call it, right? And so the final question from my side, before I ask you the question, what you would like to add, the final question from my side would be whether that has any negative impact on the government and on the support of the government, whether there are any changes, political changes on the agenda, and whether there are any changes when it comes to the system of elections and votings and so on, because I would expect this to come then.
Well, surprisingly enough, the government is doing pretty well. But it's also based on the fact that it's quite a new government. They took office in December last year. So they are happy with this COVID-19 situation right now and trying to do the best as they can. It's also about the fact that the previous 3 governments were pretty awful in a number of aspects, including digitization. And the fact that this was supposed to be more or less an interim government until the parliamentary election, which are due in November this year. And also in less than 1 month, on 27th of September, there will be the local elections in Romania. So this was a complicated year nevertheless. However, the government being in such a good position at the moment, they are pushing to organize the election despite all risks, because they say, we mustn't postpone that. If schools are open, then elections may happen. There is no reason why not to do it. Of course, we're taking precautionary measures. One thing that happened in the digitization of the election process was to allow candidates to submit their candidate files by electronic means, which was for the first time. And also they allow them to get signatures from the supporters. In Romania, in order to be eligible, you need to have a number of supporters supporting your candidacy, and it used to be a very high number. So in terms of tens of thousands of signatures, now it's less, but it's still quite a hurdle. And in July, the Permanent Electoral Authority allowed them to gather this personal data and these supporters' consent via electronic means.
Without advanced or qualified electronic signatures?
They didn't rule on that. They said that any type of system which is being made and respects the GDPR purposes is good enough. And
yeah, but that's...
And it's up on the candidate. Basically, the electoral authority said, we are not good on this subject. We don't know what to say on this. It's up to you. And you need to have one person, at least one person from each candidate, which reassures us in writing that all these signatures are real. And if this is a wrong statement, this is the penal case.
And are you aware of any cases? Or are people contesting?
Not on the digital signatures, because there was actually only one platform that was created in order to gather electronic signatures for supporters of the parties, which was not too much used. Only some new parties were trying to use them. It was a process which was a bit unclear in the sense that they requested you to provide, they were basing their, by the way, their project on a simple electronic signature. And they were asking for you to provide a copy of your ID card via electronic means in their platform. And that was the way they thought they need to, they could identify you.
Which is not really appropriate indeed. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it was the only platform that was being done. I mean, in their defense, the only thing I could say is that the decision of the electoral authority was, I think in 10th of July or 1st of July, and they just had like 10 days in order to put everything up and running. And this is a very good example of what I mean with rushing up things. So they had 10 days to be up and running, and then they had 30 days to the period in which you can legally get the signatures. So these are very short deadlines. Now it remains to be seen, and we're trying actually to engage with them in another project and to see first how they saw this process, more like a trial, and if they can improve for the parliamentary election in terms of GDPR compliance of this platform.
And the elections as such will take place as foreseen, and they will be paper-based.
They will be paper-based in a traditional way. There's been a bit of discussion about new e-voting systems, which are, let's say, a long, at least a 3 or 4 year discussion right now. But I think none of the parties were prepared for a real e-voting solution because there aren't any in place. And there are still a number of security and privacy concerns that haven't been addressed. So this only remains a plan for the future, which, yeah, we, in our association, we are very critical about electronic voting, and we can't see any really good examples from anywhere, actually. And it's always the Estonian example, which is being presented with pride. And we always explain that Estonia has a totally different system with a totally different electronic ID cards that we don't have. And it's also a risk that they are willing to take. But yeah, but for the moment, no e-voting.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Bogdan. Is there anything that I should have asked you? Anything that you want to go more into detail or explain further?
Well, not that I remember at this
Not that you remember. Okay.
Exactly. It's complicated times for anyone. It will be questions that I might remember or not.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's okay for the moment.
Fine. Okay. So then thank you so much for your time, Bogdan. I really appreciate this. I do hope that everything stays more or less stable as far as this is possible. Thank you for all your time. Also, thank you to our listeners for your time. We appreciate your presence. Please stay healthy, stay interested, and stay connected with us. All the best and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolaos.